So I recently got a comment on one of my Instagram posts and I'm here to address it.
Going to be a comprehensive review.
My name is Tiffen.
Shut up!
Now that was a pretty cool intro sequence. Guys, if you haven't checked out my animation tutorials, go ahead and check them out. I'll link them on one of the cards. If you want to learn how to make a sequence like that, I've used all the basic principles that I've taught on those, so do check them out. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I'm going to talk about how I take pictures and why my original pictures are always darker than what I end up posting online. Over the past couple of weeks, I've started posting before and after pictures on my Instagram on showing how I edit them. And then a lot of people have noticed that, my original pictures are actually very dark. Now there is a very specific reason for that, and I want to show you guys or tell you guys why I do that. Now I also need to stress on the fact that I only do this, or I follow this method of underexposing my images only when I shoot with my mirrorless cameras or a professional camera that can shoot raw images. I don't do it on my phones because phones shoot JPEG. So yes, I'm gonna get into that age-old debate, which is better, JPEGs or RAW. I'm pretty sure all of you have heard what a JPEG is, and I'm going to try and explain what a raw image is. A raw image is an image that retains a lot more information about the frame that you're taking. Now, an advantage of having this information is that you can take this information back into your computer or take it to your editing room and adjust the shadows, the highlights, the blacks, the whites, the contrast, the white balance. So all those toggles that you see on Lightroom that allows us to change the basic exposure of image can be used predominantly only with a raw image. If you shoot JPEGs, you can't adjust these that much because it starts giving you artifacts, or it starts creating a lot of blank colors or blank blacks or blank whites. Now for example, if you take a look at my recent picture Belinda that I shot, if you take a look at the highlights of this JPEG, and if I try and bring it down, you're going to see that there's no information there that can be brought back. Now with the raw image, I can bring back the sky and the buildings in the background. You can't do that with the JPEG. Now to explain this a little bit in more detail, let's look at the recent picture that I posted with my girlfriend in it. Now if you take a look at the final edited image, you're going to see that the brightest part of the image is actually the face or Belinda herself. But if you go back to the original picture, you're going to see that the brightest part of the image is the sky and the building in the background. It's almost pure white, and then you have half of Belinda engulfed in complete darkness. Now at a glance, you're going to say that there's no information there. Now this is the advantage of shooting raw. Because I shot this image and saved it as a raw file, I can individually bring up these the shadows and bring down the highlights to kind of put more emphasis or put more attention on the subject, which is Belinda. Photography is a very subjective topic, right? You get a lot of people who do a lot of retouching, but at the same time you do get a bunch of purists that are not very happy with people who edit their pictures drastically in post. Now each to their own, but if you're using a camera or if you're spending a lot of money on professional equipment, you want to make sure that you have all the options available to you. For example, you should have the option to either post the picture as it is or take it back into Lightroom or into Photoshop and edit it and bring it out a bit more. That's completely up to you, but you should know how to use the tools, which is why shooting in RAW is such an essential fact. The simplest analogy that I can explain this is, let's say you're having a sandwich. When you sit down at the table, you can either have a toasted sandwich with ham and cheese in it, and when you're biting into it, then you suddenly realize that wait, you don't like toasted bread, right? So shooting raw is like somebody giving you the option to say, hey, would you want your bread toasted or would you want to have it just plain with cheese and ham? That's the closest analogy that I can relate to shooting raw versus JPEG. Now there is a major drawback to shooting raw images. Raw images are typically 10 times bigger than a JPEG. For example, if you used to go on a holiday with an 8 GB memory card or an SD card and you could take thousands of pictures on it, now if you start shooting raw, that 8 GB SD card is only gonna give you like 200 to maybe 300 images. So there is a trade-off. You're gonna have to spend more money on SD cards, on bigger SD cards. You have to start going with 32 GB SD cards. You're gonna have to find a bigger hard disk on your PC to store these images. So there is always a balancing act when it comes to using these tools. Let's address the biggest question here. Why do I underexpose my images? Now, for me to explain this, I also have to touch a little bit on dynamic range. Dynamic range is your sensors or your camera's ability to retain as much information on the highlights as well as the shadows simultaneously, right? So it's a range between blacks and whites and how much your camera can save information to a point where the whites just become a plain white color space and the blacks just become pure black. When you're trying to expose your pictures, relying on your eyes alone is literally the worst thing that you can do. For example, when you're in a dark room, you kind of see everything perfectly, but just when you step out of that room and go into a very bright and sunny area, for a split second everything's bright, but then your eyes adjust and give you perfect exposure and you can see everything even if it's a bright and sunny day. So your eyeballs are constantly changing to adjust, so you can't necessarily trust your eyes alone. So which is why when I take pictures or when I shoot on my DSLRs or when I use these bulky cameras, I always look at the histogram. This is similar to the histogram you see on Lightroom, and this histogram tells me if I'm losing any information on the highlights or if I'm losing any information in the shadows. So when I'm taking a picture, I always have the tiny histogram on the display that shows me whether or not I can make the image a little brighter or darker. So when I was taking this picture of Belinda, my histogram was telling me that I can keep going darker because I needed to get that bright sky and the building in the background in the image, and I can keep going darker or underexposing to a point where my image won't just lose the information, like the shadows, the shoes and the laces. All of that information is still retained even though it seems to the naked eye that the picture is extremely dark, which paid off in the end. When I brought it into the editing room or brought it into the Lightroom, I could easily pull out all of this information. Now let's take a look at a situation where I didn't pay attention to my histogram. Now, this picture is a picture I took at the Universal Studios of Singapore. Top right hand corner is just pure white. No matter, even if you look at the raw image where it seems like it's very dark, it has clearly blown out the highlights and the sky. No matter how much I bring it back, it's not going to give me any information. And you can see that the dark areas of the image have plenty of information. And if I paid attention to my histogram, I would have darkened it a little bit more so that I can shift the dynamic range of my camera to the point where it retains 15 stops of light. So that's essentially why I do it in a nutshell. I underexpose because I want to retain the highlights and also retain the shadows at the same time. I know that my line of cameras, the Sonys that I'm using, performs a little better in the shadows as opposed to retaining highlights. And also I'm shooting raw, so I know that in post I can bring all of this information back even though the raw files look pretty horrible. So that's pretty much it. Let me know if you find this video helpful or informative. Please do subscribe and hit the like button. I would appreciate it greatly if you do that. Check out my Instagram. I've started posting a lot of before and after images on my Instagram, so go check them out to see how I interpret images and I edit. And you can always take ideas from a lot of different people. All of my editing style is completely a copy of a lot of people that influence me. So you guys can do the same, take ideas from other people's work. And I'll see you guys in the next one.
I know we're acting stupid.